Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Mark Azulay, and I'm here with Dr. Matt Zakreshi, and we're talking about neurodiversity, how it shows up in men, what the typology is, and really how to, I guess, work with it. Whether you're neurodiverse or you have a family member or a child that's neurodiverse, Dr. Matt is an expert in the field. So, welcome to the show.
Oh man, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I love seeing what you do because I think you take really complicated topics, right? I mean, you're a PsyD, you're a clinical psychologist, professional speaker, and you make them accessible, right? And I think you make them fun in a lot of ways. And I think that's what's needed, right? Especially in our field, is kind of coming down off the ivory tower and making our stuff actually usable. Because that's the goal, right? I mean, the goal is to help people.
I mean, there's a lot of reasons I'm a PsyD, not a PhD, but one of them is I'm a boots on the ground guy, right? Give me the therapy practice, give me the kids who need me, give me the men who need someone to talk to. Like, I don't want to talk about, gosh, if it works. I want to talk about, does it work? And then how do we fix it? Right. I'm from New Jersey. I'm aggressively pragmatic, right? If we do it, great. If we don't do it, what can we do instead?
Yeah. And it's like we need as much of that as possible, right? Especially in, a little soapboxing, right? Like I think especially in social media age where there's a lot of bad info out there, you know?
I mean, if I see one more self-styled life coach who tells me I can cure my
Yeah.
ADHD with some magnesium pills, I will throw my laptop in the lake. And then I'll feel bad because I actually need my laptop. But, theoretically, I would be empowered by that.
Yeah, there's a lot of snake oil, right? And there's a lot of people that I think are like over associate or use the terms wrong, right? Or so it's difficult to weed through the information. So we're gonna get to that in our show, but I first want to start with you, Dr. Matt. Say a little bit about your story. What got you into this? What was your experience?
So I have a very sort of unique experience. I think like a lot of people who specialize in neurodivergence, the work is personal and professional. So I was identified as gifted in second grade and then diagnosed with ADHD in high school. And frankly, that explained a lot. That was like, oh, okay, good, good. There was a reason that this was happening. But both of my parents were clinical psychologists. And so I grew up in a house where mental health was front and center of every dinner table conversation, right? I always joke that I never got grounded. I just got analyzed. So
Oh
I don't
God,
know.
that's way worse. That's way worse.
No, no, just punish me. Just to like, why would you be acting out in this way right now? It's like, oh God, that's so much worse. Um, and and it's also, I mean, when I think about masculinity, right? I was I mean, growing up in a small town, New Jersey, I played sports. That's what we did, right? I mean, I played hockey and basketball in the winter, baseball in the spring. Went to the beach and surfed in the summer, and I played soccer in the fall. Rinse, wash, repeat, right? And that's what I did. And freshman year of high school, I played soccer, and I made friends with a guy on the team who was a theater kid, and he was like, "Yeah, man, you should do theater." And I was like, "Cool, what's that?" And he's, like theater, acting, dancing, singing. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not good at any of those things. And he told me something that, has really sort of changed my life. He's like, dude, theaters always need guys. And that's true. And so on the day that auditions were for the play was also tryouts for the basketball team. And, I knew if I tried for the basketball team, I'd probably be the seventh or eighth guy, like good enough to play a little bit, not good enough to start. And just looking forward, it's like, am I going to play high school basketball if I'm not even good enough to start on the freshman team? Probably not, right? There's a surplus of chubby 6 foot white dudes in New Jersey, and like I was one of them. So I did musical theater, and they accepted me into the show, and I went home, and my dad was like, "How would basketball tryouts go?" I'm like, "I actually signed up for the musical." And Mark, I'll tell you, like, it was one of those moments that you look back on and you realize how significant it was. My dad was like, cool. What do we need to do for that? Like, if he had gone like cliche sports parent,
Yeah.
I probably would have gone running back to basketball. But my dad pivoted into that space and said, awesome. And really from that point, like that was the first time I became aware of my masculinity because I started to deviate from what other people are doing. Right? I can't tell you how many people are like, "Oh yeah, so you do theater, so you're gay, right?
That's a
Where's your boy?"
stereotype, right? Yeah.
A huge
Yeah.
stereotype. And it's, I'm a big energy guy. I'm very loud and touchy-feely and like, it's the sort of thing like I'm happy to note the fact that I'm not gay, right? That's not a, that's I'm not in that club. But it's also like if you were to look at me, if when I watch the recording of this, I'll be like, I could see how someone could think he's gay.
Mhm.
He talks with his hands, he's got a relatively high-pitched voice, right? And it's the sort of thing like, but you don't realize you're not in the club until they kick you out of the club.
Mhm.
And oh man, hold up. So, and of course it's like, if you guys knew what went on behind closed doors, but that's neither here nor there, right? I'm like, you guys think I'm gay, but I get to hang around with like dozens of very attractive, bendable women. But no, no, you go wrestle the other sweaty dudes.
Right,
Tell
exactly. Like you're where the
right.
girls are that have like personality and character and like yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, and all of those experiences make you a better therapist. Because, like we were talking about before, this job is all about connection, right? And I mean, I've worked in corporate America, I've been a bartender, I've traveled around, I've done a million different jobs. And so there are parts of me that are very traditionally masculine, and there are parts of me that are less traditionally masculine, more contemporary views of masculinity, right? But the idea is that, you know, you bring me basically any topic, I can find a way to connect with you about it. And the more I talk to other dads, really other men, right, is just that that's really what we're all looking for. We're looking for somebody to authentically connect with past the, did you see the local sports team's game last night? And like, I love sports. I absolutely, I'm still a little bit bummed that Wake Forest basketball lost last night, but I'll get over
Mhm.
it. But like guys, I think are increasingly looking to talk about something that's more than, you know, the sports team or the sort of cliche like, take my wife, please, right?
Yeah.
You know, and but if you don't have a space to be that version of yourself, then I think that energy sort of spins and spins and spins.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I run a bunch of men groups, and that's the idea, right? I think guys are craving that. I think like, I thought it was just our generation, right? The younger millennial generation of stuff, right? But I think Gen X really needs it. I think the boomers are starting to come around to it because I agree completely. Like that, yeah. What's the sports team or what's the next show on Netflix or whatever, right? Like, oh yeah, I like mowed my lawn, right? Like all that stuff is really unsatisfying and lonely, right? So I'm wondering, like, what is your community of men? You mentioned dads, right? But how did you try to find these more deeper conversations in your life?
Well, we moved about 2.5 years ago. And we live in a sort of very classic Jersey suburb.
Mhm.
And we're lucky. Their neighborhood's turning over. There's a lot of young families, and there's this sort of like you do the guy head pop thing, the pop, and they're like, like, all right, cool, and it's the sort of thing somebody's got to take the first step. We're lucky enough we have a pool, so when I see a family out in the neighborhood, I'm like, swing by sometime. Like, we'll put some burgers on the grill, we'll put on some music, the kids can jump in the pool, and we can have a cold beer or, do whatever. And you've got to give the opportunity, you've got to give the space. One of the things I often think about is like if you have privilege, it makes sense to build a bigger table than a higher fence, right? And I'm very comfortable around people. I'm an extrovert. We're lucky enough to have a pool. I mean, why would I not lever those things to make more people, but as I mean, men included, comfortable, and it's amazing how much people, it's I'm sure you see this in group, the shoulder drop,
Hmm.
like guys come in and they're like sort of like at attention, and then like, then they sort of like they drop the shoulders, you can see them relaxing, usually a beverage might help if that's your thing, right? But then it's just like, okay, you know what? Like I've established myself as a person who at least has created a place where you can feel comfortable. Right on. Let's explore that further, right? And and everybody acclimates to that at different rates, but it's nice to have a place you can return to where that's a thing you can do.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really true. And I think, yeah, I like that at attention thing, right? Because I think a lot of men were scared. I think we're competing with all other men all the time, right? We're like posturing, we're trying to jockey for the hierarchies, right? Trying to be like, oh yeah, I'm the alpha guy, right? Like I'm the strongest, I'm the tallest, whatever. I want to bring us to neurodiversity, right? Like I'm curious how that plays into it because I know that like social skills and social perception, right, are different for neurodiverse individuals.
Oh, absolutely. And so there's this concept of masking that's
Yeah.
very common in the neurodivergent community. It's basically putting on a mask, pretending that you do believe, think, feel like other
Mhm.
people. And masking is a social skill. It's sometimes you need to do it, right? Your boss is talking to you and telling you some god awful story. You're like, whatever you say, boss, yeah, it's great. And so masking is not inherently a bad thing, but you've got to have places in your life where you can drop the mask,
Mhm.
where you can relax, take a breath. And I think increasingly people don't have that, right? The world is nonstop, it's 360, and it's hard for people to know where they can sort of let their hair down a little
Mhm.
bit. And and also it's so interesting because the data feel paradoxical on this, but guys are much more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. They're much more likely to be diagnosed with autism.
Yeah.
And yet the rates of men who seek therapy are much lower. So you've got a lot of people identified who are carrying around this burden, who are then not getting the treatment necessary to regulate said
Mhm.
burden, right? And I can't tell you how many partners of people I see who are like, I'm going to go to therapy until my partner can go to therapy, right? And
Yeah.
like, give me the tools to regulate my partner because my partner's not ready for this yet. And like, listen, that's absolutely a part of what I do. You can only meet people where they are,
Mhm.
but so I think a lot of guys might get that label slapped on them, but nobody really sits down and explains to you what that means. And And so then you're carrying around sort of some bad information, some misinformation, incomplete information. You know, like when I ask guys about ADHD, they're like, oh, that's like the look over there, it's a squirrel thing, right? I'm like, that's part of it. But like, do you know that people with ADHD are significantly more likely to be hurt by rejection? It's called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, right? And it's not just rejection that happens in real life, but rejection that happens in your head. Like I can't ask that woman out. She gonna say no to me.
Yeah.
And then now you're deep in your feels about a thing that hasn't actually happened. But that's a piece of the ADHD brain. Or let's say that, you're autistic and going to an open gym at the Y is a nightmare for you. It's loud, it's bright, it's
Mhm.
squeaky, it's smelly, right? A lot of people who are autistic have significant sensory needs.
Mhm.
How are you supposed to do that broy bro thing at the gym if that place is not a place you can go? Because I don't know about you, Mark, but if a guy came up and says, "Hey, do you want to work out with me in my basement?" I'd be like, "How well do I
Right. Am I dying? Is
know?"
this the last thing I'm gonna do?
Like,
Yeah.
can I drop a pin, let people know where I'm
Yeah.
at? Like, meet me. So it's the sort of thing, like, there have to be ways for neurodivergent men to enter traditionally masculine
Mhm.
spaces, which are traditionally defined by the word for this is neurotypical, right? You know, People who have regular brains are largely within normal limits, and that's about 70% of the population. So the world is built for 70% of people, and the 30% of us on the outside of that are like, cool, where do I put my stuff down?
Yeah. I think that's really, really well said, right? Especially when we talk about that male posturing. If guys feel like they can't hang, I think they end up isolating, and a lot of neurodivergent individuals don't get out, right? Or they think something's wrong with them fundamentally, right? Like they have a bad personality or they're unlovable or they're never gonna have luck with women or, whatever, right? Like I think they can fall into shame because it's not normalized in a way.
Yeah.
And I think as a man, it's difficult to get social skills training, right? I think feminine spaces
Yeah.
typically talk more about, oh, hey, what should I say to so and so about this, or help me, brainstorm this difficult conversation with my partner, right? Whereas as men, we don't really talk about that much. So I think it's like if people feel behind the curve, they might feel stuck there, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you're stuck between those two worlds, like what I'm supposed to do and what I want to
Mhm.
do, I mean that creates a lot of tension and the tension keeps us from connecting, right? And there's a guy I work with who's like, and he's a, very sort of traditionally masculine guy. And he was, he's like like people keep telling me I gotta do yoga. I gotta do yoga to calm because I'm angry and I want to calm down. And so I let him rant for a while. And I'm like, hey, listen, do you want to do yoga? And he's like, no, I hate yoga. And I'm like, crazy idea. Went to 5 years of grad school for this. Then don't do yoga. He's like,
Wild.
I have to do something to calm down. I'm like, yes, you do. Look at this. I was like, you like to hike, right? And he's like, yeah, I like to hike. I was like, what if you put on some chill music and went for a hike? And he was like, am I allowed to do that?
Yeah.
And isn't that what masculinity in 2024 is all about? Am I allowed to do this? Yes, yes, you are. If it works for you and it doesn't hurt anybody else, then put your own spin on it. And I'm telling you, I've never seen a guy release his rage faster than this guy. And it was, one of the best interventions I've ever done. And I didn't do anything.
Well, yeah, well, you gave him permission, right? Like, I think as another man and a man in authority figure, right, you gave him permission to break out of that man box a little bit, right? Because that man box is really tight for a lot of guys, especially neurodiverse individuals. We're going to move to our first commercial break. And when we get back, I want to dig into other ways that people are stuck, whether they're neurodiverse or they're men or anything, and some of the things that you can do to help shift out of that. So if you're listening, hang on in there and we'll see you on the other side.
All right.
Great job. All clear.
Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Dr. Matt. He is a expert in neurodiversity, both from professionally and personally. And we were having a great conversation about masculinity and how guys can get stuck in this man box, especially neurodivergent individuals, where they can't connect, they can't show up in kind of traditional masculine spaces, and they end up isolating. So, Dr. Matt, I guess my question for you to start off this segment is, what are other ways that people get stuck? You know, what do the prisons look like?
Oh, there's so many prisons. So many prisons. So let's break it into three different prisons, right? There's the self prison,
Hmm.
right? There's the occupational prison, and then there's the social prison, right? So self prison is, who do I want to be, right? What is the best version of myself that exists? And I think there's this piece of a lot of guys where they get very hung up on sort of the glory days. Like, when was the point in my life where I felt that alpha energy,
Hmm.
right? And and I think that's actually, it's one of the sneaky benefits of being neurodivergent, because like, if the cliche is the neurotypical male peaks in high school, a lot of neurodivergent people are white knuckling high school. They're like, I just need to get to college. I just need to get to college. I just need to get out of here.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have a thing to look back on and say that was my apex time. My apex time is still evolving. I'm moving towards it. I love being a dad. Like, I think these are my best years, most likely. But it's but that's a thing that has constantly re-evolved. So, you don't want to be that Uncle Rico, if we're going to make a Napoleon Dynamite reference, yeah, because all my pop culture references stopped somewhere around
Right.
2007.
When you have kids, you're not watching movies anymore, right?
I can talk to you about Bluey if you
Yeah.
want.
Yeah.
And so if you're sitting there listening to this, use those glory days not as a time machine, but as a lighthouse, right? Where's This is my lodestar. Where do I go? Where's the best version of this now? Because you're probably not going to get another year of high school football in, but I guarantee you there's a Pop Warner team near you who needs a coach, right? Or maybe, back then you were excited because you were building more stuff, working with your hands, doing wood shop. I'll say this again, like, not only do places like Home Depot offer classes that are not awful, but also, I mean, there are a lot of these community help boards, right? Are you telling me that you can't take your skills and help a neighbor down the road, fix up their fence? Right? I mean, that's the thing. Problems that have multiple solutions that attach multiple areas I mean, that's the golden bullet in the mental health world, right? So like, okay, so you're telling me that I could get this guy who wants to build more stuff involved in this school for kids who are learning STEM, and then that adult is now connected to a community where there's kids who look up to them, other adults to bounce off of. They're doing something that brings them joy because they're working with their hands. I mean, like more of this, please, right? I'll order 17 of those. So it starts with values, right? And if you don't feel like you've got the time to sit down and figure those things out as a man, as a very busy guy, well, that's where therapy can be helpful, or coaching,
Mhm.
or talking to a religious leader. But it's also, I hereby give you permission to call your best friend and say, like, yo, can I get an hour of your time? I really want to talk to you about, what do you think are the best parts of me, right? Because A, your best friend's totally going to get down with that, and two, I would bet you a steak dinner your best friend's probably aching to have that same conversation as well, right? So anchor in your values and move forward from there. Second thing is this idea of occupational prison, right? Are you a breadwinner? Are you a stay-at-home dad? Are you in between jobs, right? Do you feel like you sold out and you got that golden parachute, but now it's sort of like the hamster wheel of doom? Like, I just have to keep running. I just have to keep running. The kids want to go to Disney next year. I got to keep
Right.
running,
Golden
right?
handcuffs, right?
Oh God,
Yeah.
right? It's wild.
Yeah.
And 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 it's I'll tell you this, it breaks my heart every time I see this, because I'll see a guy stick his head out of the sand and be like, yeah, things are really hard at work. And somebody will, yeah, I wish I had your problems getting paid what you get. And the guy's like, well, I'll go clearly to go back under the sand and never speak
Hmm.
again. Right? So this is the thing. It's so easy to think that people have it worse. Yeah, no shit. Right? People in Darfur have it worse than us. Okay, that's a thing. Also, a lot of people have it better than you,
Hmm.
right? You are much closer to the middle than you are to the top. And I think, the word I use for this in therapy is is called top down versus bottom up thinking. Top down thinking is I want it to be perfect. Anything less than perfect is bad,
Hmm.
right? If you're a golfer, you're going to get 18. Like nobody's ever done that. Sometimes to get 18 on one hole, that's where
That's
I'm
about where
at.
I'm at. Yeah, that's
Yeah. You and I can go just duff a little bit together. So the idea is like if you and maybe you're like, well, I'm never going to get an 18, but it's like if I don't get a 70, it's a bad round of golf. If the worst thing that happened to you today is you spent 5 hours outside with your friends, it's like, okay, like, yes, you didn't swing as well as you wanted, but this is you flip it to bottom up thinking. The default, as I did, zero. The default is, well, holy shit, I just never left the couch. So you got up, you got the clothes on, you went outside, you saw your friends, you paid the thing, you did the golf, you got some drinks on the 19th hole, you went home. That is a lot more than zero, right? And there's a lot of power in that. So, you're allowed to be upset that it's not the way things aren't the way you want them to be. And actually, the best way to deal with that is to reframe that as, but you know what? I didn't make my goal today, but I am a damn sight closer to it than I was yesterday. Right. And there's something kind of beautiful about that, right?
yeah. I want to zoom in on that a little bit, right? Because I think a lot of guys, work mainly with millennial generation. Like we have that, and quick about me, like I was in the gifted and talented program and I had to like work on that perfectionism that you're talking about, right? Like I was conditioned that life was easy, right? I didn't have to try in school. I didn't have to work that hard. Like I just kind of like got stuff,
Yeah.
and then life got hard. Right, like
Yeah.
mid college, I was like, "Oh my god, I need to study," and I didn't have any study skills. Didn't really know how to focus. Right, was used to just kind of like winging it and getting B's, getting good enough. Right,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of millennials have a similar story. So I really just want to like underline what you're saying. This idea of having a good enough attempt, or
Yeah.
like learning to be bad at stuff, right? Because the first step to being good at something is sucking ass for like a long time, like way longer than you think it is,
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm curious if you have any other strategies because I think that keeps a lot of people in my generation paralyzed for decades,
Decade.
long
I
time.
mean,
Yeah.
you think about it this way, right? Like, it's amazing how many things you'd be better at if you gave yourself permission to be a beginner, right? And this is where some of that masculinity
Yeah.
stuff comes in because it's like, I got to be great at grilling. I got to be great at parenting. I got to be great at
Hmm.
driving people on the family vacation or whatever it is, right? And it's like, you don't have to be great at anything. It's awesome if you are great at something. More of that, please. But what you need to be at it is competent. Competence a lot lower bar to clear. Do you know how many competent people are in positions of power and how many incompetent people are?
Yeah, more so, more of those, right? Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you,
Yeah.
you know, is that the thing? You don't need to be great at
Yeah.
it. You just need to be able to do it.
Hmm.
And if you scale down that tension, you're going to find that you can breathe,
Hmm.
right? You don't need to be a perfect parent. You just need to be a competent one. Are my kids wearing relatively clean clothes? Do they have food in their bellies? And is the house not actively on fire? If you do nothing else today, that's okay. That's a pretty good day, you know? And there's so much of this stuff where like it's funny because you see like the social media for women, right? And how it's like the house is perfect, the birthday party was perfect, right? The dress was perfect, the outfits were perfect, right? I feel like guys see more of the structure around that. They see like, well, why is their house like that? Why do they have the guest room? We don't have a guest
Hmm.
room. Why do they take this vacation? Why do they have this car? Why do they? And it's like, dude, for all you know, they've maxed out 13 credit cards, right? And they're like one missed paycheck away from the creditors coming and taking it all away.
Yeah.
Like, you know, comparison is the thief of joy,
Hmm.
you know? And when you think about the millennial generation, which grew up online in a way that, I think you and I just barely missed that. Like I remember AOL Instant Messenger,
Yeah.
right? But I got Facebook in college when you could only be on college in Facebook if you had a college email
Me
address.
too. Yeah. I was like right on, like I didn't get a smartphone until like the end of college. Yeah.
Let's go,
I
right?
just, I missed it. I'm so happy. I'm so happy. I'm so grateful.
I mean, can you
Yeah.
imagine?
Yeah.
It blows my mind.
Yeah.
So you've got this just wild. sense of not only are you consumable, right? Everyone can see it,
Hmm.
but it's also like, I mentioned this before. I grew up in a small town. I was the smartest kid in my class. I
Hmm.
was definitely the smartest kid in my grade.
Hmm.
I was arguably the smartest kid in my school, right? And growing up in a small town, that was just what you saw. That was your only frame of
Yeah.
reference. Now, all I have to do is click a button on my phone and I can see anybody anywhere in the world doing anything, right? It's like, oh, well, like let me see how my frat brother from college is doing. Oh, they're in Australia. That's not a thing I've ever done for my kids. And it's just
Yeah.
like, it's amazing how quickly that just shatters,
Hmm.
right? And and it's the sort of thing that a lot of times people ask you to practice gratitude, and gratitude's a good practice. I think for a lot of us, gratitude might be a step too far at first. I like the idea of acknowledgement, right? It's like, oh, that's a thing that's happening. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just a thing that's happening, right? Right now it's raining. It's just a thing that's happening, right? And because there's this idea is that you don't have to be positive about it, especially if that positivity is coming from an inauthentic place.
Totally. Yeah.
But you can authentically just say, that's happening.
Hmm.
My buddy's in Australia with his family. That's happening. I definitely have some feels about it. But unless he's a really shitty friend, he didn't go to Australia to spite you.
Yeah.
You know what's going to really get under Mark's
Hmm.
skin? Jesus, right? So it's the idea, just give yourself permission to be like, that's a thing that happened. It's just a thing that happened. And you'll be amazed how much the emotions that hook onto that release
Hmm.
when you don't give them a place to anchor.
Yeah, I'm talking about it's mindfulness practice, right? I mean, it's a big part of what I do, right? It's this idea of like, yeah, just tasting it, right? Just touch it and then move
Mhm.
back, right?
Yep.
Because like you're saying, there's a lot of value to feeling that, being like, oh wow, I am jealous. That's okay. Use that as motivation, right? Like, great, you got in touch with the desire. You got in touch that you really like Australia, so figure out a
Yep.
way to get there, you know? Or wow, you really like that new car. You really like whatever, you know? But it doesn't have to control. But similarly, right? I think we talk about getting stuck and this man box. I think we're supposed to have no emotion, you know, and especially like we can be angry, but
Yeah.
our anger also has to be powerful. We can't be
Yeah.
angry and impotent, right? We have to be like, I'm pissed off and I'm gonna kill that motherfucker, right? Like we have to have this like rage and be like, I can't believe they did X, Y, and Z. Like it still has to have this power thing. Whereas when you talk about comparison and jealousy, that's kind of impotent rage. There's nothing that like I can do to get to Australia, right? To be with this person, and it's insecurity. And I think a lot of men we don't. There's no room for insecurity because it's so unbelievably threatening. You know?
Well, and that threatening piece, right? Because
Yeah.
you think about fear and anger are so intertwined. And, the fancy psychology word for this is egosyntonic.
Hmm.
It basically means it's a lot more comfortable for us to be angry than it is for us to be scared or sad or freaked out or overwhelmed. You know, the thing that blew my mind when I became a dad was how angry I was. I was so, and I'm not an angry person. I would just be like, why am I so angry? Because my life was out of control and I hadn't
Yeah.
slept in months. And it was just so much easier to be angry than it was to be scared or to raise my hand and say I need help, right? And and it wasn't until I sat down with my dad actually. Well, I'll bring him into my dad and my father-in-law. I have a great father-in-law. I'm very lucky there. Um, and I was just like, do you guys remember being angry when you and before they were both like, absolutely,
Nice.
right?
Nice.
Just like, and think about this, just like power of having another guy to be like, yo, you get me, right? I get you, bro. And that's, like, like even telling this right now, I feel that release in my chest again, right? And it's this idea of, like, so like say you're out there, right? And you're like, I don't have a good relationship with my dad, or I don't have a good relationship with my father-in-law. Another good reason to go to therapy. I'll tell you this, say you say this to another guy, there's a non-zero chance he's a dick about it.
Hmm.
Like I
Oh
can't tell
yeah.
you what the person is, right?
Yeah.
But this, you're not the asshole in that story, right? You be vulnerable, you show up as a real version of yourself. And that guy's like, yeah, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, dude. Well, A, he's lying, and B, so what? Right? Because that's the thing. Like, we have no face to save. And if that guy thinks, you're less than because you showed some vulnerability, then he's not the kind of guy you want in your life. He's not going to be part of your story moving forward because that's a guy who at best is wildly in denial and at worst is, completely untouched with his emotions. Like, I'm not saying you need to get on the couch and watch Bridget Jones's Diary and sob. If that's not your thing, that's not your thing, right? I'm more of a Love Actually guy myself, but
Fair. Yeah.
you know, but the idea is that like if way more people are carrying this around than you think, then the odds of you finding someone to share that with are higher than you think.
Yeah. And just to kind of, emphasize that, I think it's very masculine to be courageous and say things, right? I think as men, like being in touch with reality as it is a very
Yeah.
masculine trait, right? Like no lies, no exaggeration. Like you said, just like recognition, like this is what reality is and how do I operate in reality as it is, rather than in my delusion of what I want it to be or what I'm afraid it is or what I hope it is or whatever, right? It's really like tapping into the moment.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, we don't want to have impotent anger. And one of the biggest piece of advice I could give you if you're listening to this is that investing in something that will help your life that you won't see the immediate return on is the bravest thing you can do. It's immediate return to punch a wall, right? Immediate return, right? And walls are undefeated. You're not going to win that fight. But if you invest in the therapy, or if you invest in going to a life coach, or going to the gym, or getting or going for hikes, you may not feel that change immediately, but you're going to look up 4 months from now and go, oh shit, my life is so much better. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of like value in practicing commitment and discipline, I think. We're going to move to our next commercial break. And we get back, we're going to share some more tips for getting unstuck, right? I think
Awesome.
ways to like help guys move forward and start to build, right? Build a sense of self. So yeah, if you're interested in that, we'll see you on the other side of the commercial break. Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Dr. Matt, and we're talking about getting unstuck. And I think a lot of guys get stuck. I think a lot of guys don't want to talk about being stuck, you know, and I think a lot of guys kind of can get weighed down, you know. There's a great book, I'm sure you've read it, Atomic Habits. If you're listening, check out that book. It's phenomenal. It's really powerful. The audiobook's like 5 hours, super short. But basically, the premise of that book is that there's nothing personally wrong with us when we fail. It's that our systems aren't good enough, right? We're not taking care of ourselves. We don't understand our mind, whether it's neurotypical or neurodiverse. We don't have the kind of the external piece in place, because I think this myth of motivation and passion and it should all be internally driven. You don't need any help from anybody and it's all good. And if you fail, it's because you're like a weak person or a weak man. Like that destroys people, you know? So I'm curious, Dr. Matt, like, what are some systems or what are some things that people can put into place to set themselves up to win, right? To get unstuck.
Oh man, you totally stole my Atomic Habits thing. I was
Oh,
like,
you're gonna do the same thing?
I was like, I've been living that right now, and it's just like all these stupid little things. I'm like, oh, they actually make a difference. I hate it.
Yeah.
Right. But since you scooped me on my book, I'll give you a different one. The book is called How to Be Everything by Emily Wapnick.
Mhm.
And I tell you this, as a neurodivergent person who has wanted to be everything all the time, I never found a book who spoke to my soul like this. Because she's like, hey, here's this crazy idea. The old way of work is dead.
Mhm.
So, what does work look like for you? And she doesn't come out and out say it's for neurodivergent people, but it definitely, the lessons are very neurodivergent. And, so like say you're an ADHDer, right? And you're like, I've got 93 ideas in my head right now. The singular biggest problem with ADHD is your brain lacks an ability to triage those 93 ideas. You're like, so you'll do the thing where it's like you're trying to cram 93 pieces of luggage through a door. And it's like, well, gosh, why is this stupid door broken?
Mhm.
Or why do I suck that I can't pick 93 pieces of furniture through this door? It's like, crazy idea. Just
Yeah.
right. Because our brains are bad at that triage piece, it sort of we don't know where to start. And because we don't know where to start, we can't get started.
Mhm.
So the idea here, and I talk about this with my wife all the time, it's like sometimes if you want me to do the garbage, I have to wash the dishes because we call this galaxy brain, right? But it's like wash the dishes, then the dishes will be clean, and then I can run the dish, then I can run the disposal, then I'll clear the disposal, put it in the garbage, then take the garbage out. And as long as you can communicate that, people understand where you're coming from. You may need to walk through the side door to get the job done, right? And that's I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's definitely what you need to do. And the thing that works is often the thing that's going to be most helpful to us down the line. So let's take that a step further, right? Let's talk about, you know, you're like, I wouldn't even know how to get started. It's too big. Well, Atomic Habits, right? You can't, you're not going to get the job you want for making sure you shave every day, but shaving every day is going to help you along the journey to getting the
Mhm.
job you want.
Mhm.
And as men, we are wired to have it all the time, immediately. We were just talking about this before the break, right? Investing in the stuff that the garden you're not going to be able to sit under for 3 years, right? Because I'll tell you this, if you if you are motivated to change your life, you have to sign up for the long haul. I mean, it's just immediate change doesn't last. And the thing that makes it sustainable is lifetime change, right? If your best friend's wedding's coming up in 3 months, right? You could absolutely crash diet, go keto, cut out booze, right? You'll drop 20 pounds, you'll fit into your suit, you'll look fucking banging, right? You'll probably hook up with a bridesmaid. We're very proud of you. Yay, right? But also because you haven't drank in 3 months, you'll probably get blackout at the reception,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then you go back to your old habits and you'll put the weight right back on. It's the idea here of trying to drink one less beer a week,
Mhm.
or have, like for me, it was getting all the Doritos out of the house. I have a problem with Doritos, right? But I like chips, so I only have Pringles. Now, Pringles are a little bit better
Mhm.
for you than Doritos. Or my kids got me into popcorners. Popcorners are delicious. I'll eat those all day, right? the other thing, it's not, we call this in psychology harm reduction,
Mhm.
right? So instead of taking out this giant bite of the thing, take a nibble, right? And that's where you're going to see like you are making this thing not fixed, but better. And that's a really powerful thing because that starts that positive momentum, right? There's a great episode of How I Met Your Mother where Barney Stinson's like, I'm gonna go run a marathon. They're like, how do you know how to run a marathon? He's like, this is how you run a marathon. Step one, start running. There is no step two.
Right. Just keep going forever.
And
Yes.
that's hilarious.
Yeah.
It's also utterly unrealistic,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Nobody can just leave their front door right now and run a marathon
Mhm.
unless you're already a marathoner,
Mhm.
right? So if you are sitting there and be like, I can never run a marathon, not right now, you can't. But those run to the mailbox and back, run to the street corner and back, run around the block and back, run around the neighborhood and back, very Forrest Gump, right? You just kept running,
Mhm.
right? And I don't need you to run all the way back and forth across America. But the idea is that you're closer to being able to do the thing. The way to light that match, light the fuse, is to do something small, right? Lighting the fuse doesn't blow up the build. I'm sorry, you don't blow up the building with the match. You use the match to light the fuse that blows up the building, right? And that's where the discipline you mentioned comes in.
Yeah. And I think what you're talking about is the humility, which I think is something that a lot of men really need to practice in a way, right? Because I think a lot of men are afraid of humiliation, which is kind of the dark shadow cousin of humility. Like you were saying earlier in the episode, this idea that I think as men, we're supposed to be good at everything, like right out the box, especially the masculine stuff, we're supposed to be able to like fix things around the house and do the oil change, and like throw the pigskin around or be a dad, right? I mean, we have this thing put on us that we're supposed to be very competent all the time. And it's like, well, if you never learned how to do those things, you're not going to be that good at it. But what I'm
Yeah.
hearing you really talk about is this practice of humility, of being like, yeah, I'm going to be bad at this, but that's okay. Because I think a lot of guys do get stuck when they're like, I want to run a marathon, and they run around the block and they're just sweating and they feel nauseous and they're panting and they just want to like do nothing but eat donuts when they get back home. And they're like, oh my God, like you have to face where you're at. I mean,
Yeah.
you really got to face reality when you put yourself in those challenging situations.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I think if perhaps there's no more powerful idea than that script. Then when it starts to play in your head, it's like, well, I could be able to just if I had started in high school,
Yeah.
or if I had kept going in college. And I would say, like, listen, the best time to start something was 5 years ago, but the second best time is right now.
Hmm.
We're always in the second best time to start something, right? And it doesn't matter if you tried it and failed it before, because this is, well worn to the point of being a cliche, but it still matters. Fail is a acronym for frequent attempts in learning,
Hmm.
right? And if you're a neurodivergent person and you're used to failing, you're used to struggling, you're like, my failures indicate my lack of worth as a human, to which I say bullshit, right? Because failing is humility. Humility means growth,
Yeah.
you know? And part of that, part of that growth process is understanding where to direct that energy. You know, I mean, you mentioned like changing oil, throwing the pigskin around. I'm halfway decent at football. I am useless with car stuff.
Hmm.
I call my mechanic. I'm like, yeah, the light's doing the thing. It's making the noise.
Yeah. It's
And
beeping
he's
again.
like,
Yeah.
bring it over. And I pay him for that.
Yeah.
And and you know what? That's okay, right? Because no one's good at everything.
Hmm.
My wife handles all the finances in our house, and I do all the cooking. That's very atypical gender roles, right?
Hmm.
But my wife hates cooking, and I hate math.
Hmm.
So,
So it works out. Yeah.
and I'll tell you this, there's still that little twinge in the back of my head, like when people come over and I start cooking, they're like, what are they going to say? I'll tell you this, we've had dozens, hundreds of couples through the doors over the years. Nobody said a damn word.
Yeah. I'm also the primary cook in my relationship, and I love it. I mean, it's a huge hobby of mine, and like
Yeah,
people love it. Yeah. But it is like, yeah, it's outside that man box, right?
yeah.
Like you were saying. Yeah. I think like, I guess, do you have any tips for helping people tolerate feeling stupid, right? Or tolerate humility? Because there is, I think as both of us, doing psychotherapy, right? Like there is a very visceral feeling,
Yeah.
failing, when you talk about the bottom up thing, right? Like failing feels like something, right? It often feels confusing. It feels defeating. It feels deflating. We can get sad. And with a lot of, me personally and a lot of the guys I work with, I think it takes practice to tolerate that actual like physical sensation of
Oh
failure.
yeah, it absolutely does.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the go home and work, don't eat donuts thing. I'll tell you this, whenever I try something that's a stretch for me, whether it's giving a talk or doing my daughter's hair or I mean those are equally scary things, just in very different directions.
Yeah.
I give myself a reward.
Mhm.
Like our brains run on dopamine, and when we attempt a task, the task completes when we get more dopamine. It's sort of like going to the gym. You get a little bit more dopamine for going than you had when you started. But if that thing is really stressful, you might think, well, like virtue is its own reward or some other bullshit. And like, dude, if you did the thing and it was a huge stretch for you, if going to your wife's office party at Christmas is a huge stretch for you, absolutely pour yourself a nice glass of scotch when you get home,
Mhm.
or watch an episode of Battlestar Galactica,
Mhm.
or whatever the thing is that brings you joy.
Mhm.
You're allowed to invest in your own dopamine, right? I'll tell you this, like I've got a Thin Mint cookie sitting here on my desk. When I'm done talking to you, I'm going to eat that cookie because that closed the dopamine loop for
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
right? And so it's that sort of thing. Like it doesn't take away the feeling of panic and dread of
Mhm.
failure in the moment,
Mhm.
but you're also closing the loop on a positive way,
Mhm.
right? And then when you've closed that loop, then your brain's like, okay, well, that was the thing that happened. It's a step on this journey. Let's take the next one. The other thing, and I think it's a really powerful reframe, is struggling. We mean struggling like we're gonna die, like struggling like you're out at ocean and there's a rip current and you are struggling to keep your head above water and the stakes feel very high. You and I feel like struggling is it's a better metaphor is playing video games,
Mhm.
right? If the bad guys are getting harder and the music is getting louder and faster and you're in a dungeon, are you going the right direction or the wrong direction?
Right.
Right?
It means you're getting better, right? When
It means
life
you're
gets
getting
harder, you're getting better. Yeah.
you fail more the better you get. And
Yeah.
isn't that weird? It's so paradoxical,
Mhm.
right? But that's the thing. And it's like, so if you see life like a video game, because honestly, most things that challenge us, most things that make us feel that dread, that failure flash, they're not life or death. They just feel it, right? And if I try to change my oil and I fuck up and the oil gets all over my driveway, that sucks, and I'm allowed to feel upset about it. But the only thing that's changed is that there's oil on my driveway,
Yeah. And now it's
right?
time to learn how to clean up motor oil, right? You have another opportunity to learn. Yeah.
You know, honey, could you get me a large beer,
Yeah.
please? And that's the thing. It's just like, yeah, if you can see the things you're doing in a broader context of growth, right? Then I think what ends up happening is that you give yourself permission to fail more often and thus get better faster.
Yeah. Yeah. We have to start to wrap up our episode, but I feel like we could keep talking for another couple hours. So I'm sure I'll have you on for a future episode as well. But Dr. Matt, where can people learn more about you if they want to hear more of your talks or kind of tap into your knowledge?
So I have two primary jobs. So therapy is through the Neurodiversity Collective. That's our group therapy practice, and we've got a lot. We've got myself and a couple of great people on the team. And if these ideas make sense for like your organization or your company, then it's drmattzakreski.com. And I travel all over the world to give talks, and it's really my favorite thing to do. So, that's how you find me and do get more of this utter awesomeness.
There you go. Hell yeah, man. Yeah, so check that out. Both those links are in our show notes. So you should be able to click on those. And we just started video streaming this podcast. So if you want to see what we look like, we are on YouTube. You can just Google or I guess search for Men's Therapy Online and you'll find this. It's also on our website, www.menstherapy.online or www.menstherapypodcast.com. So check all that stuff out to get more out of this podcast. So Dr. Matt, thank you again for being on the show.
Mark, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, take care. Bye.